Imagine the cobblestone streets of a sleepy medieval town, barely lit by the warm, trembling glow of a few lanterns swinging gently in the evening breeze. The windows above are shuttered, and most of the town lies wrapped up in blankets and dreams. This is the hour when most honest folk have long since tucked themselves into bed. But not everyone is asleep. Some, like the quiet figure, slipping between shadow and light, move carefully through this sleepy world. A medieval thief, his hands trembling just a bit as he reaches into his worn pocket. Even if we tend to picture a bold rascal with a roguish grin, most thieves weren't bold at all. They were careful, very careful. Every breath mattered. Every creak of an old wooden floor, every loose pebble that might roll too loudly, all were dangers that could end the whole quiet adventure. You might hear him holding his breath as he rounds a corner, hoping that the town watch hasn't changed their route. That was one of the hardest parts of stealing in the Middle Ages. There was never a sure plan. Watchmen took different paths every night, especially when they suspected trouble. A single clatter of boots on stone might send the thief sprinting into the nearest dark alley or into someone's backyard garden, just to avoid an angry guard with a lantern. And that wasn't even the most worrying part. Medieval houses weren't built to be easy targets. Windows were small, doors were heavy, and most people kept a wooden club or pitchfork close to their bedside. If someone heard even the faintest scrape at their latch, they'd jump up faster than you could imagine, fueled by fear that tonight might be the night their silver coins or bread would vanish. This thief, whoever he was, had to stay more than quiet. He had to move like a shadow and wait for just the right moment, the moment when a drunken shopkeeper had left his door latch carelessly open, or when a window was left propped up by a sleepy maid. Every second outside was a gamble with serious odds. And that was one of the strange things about being a thief back then. It was never about bold treasure heists like in the grand stories. It was mostly small, modest steals, maybe a scarf someone left outside to dry, a loaf of bread cooling too close to the windowsill, or a few coins hidden under a mattress. The kind of steals born from hunger and need, not from adventure. And as the thief paused in the dark to catch his breath, listening to the distant clop of a horse or the low mutter of someone finally putting their lantern out for the night, one thing was clear: it sucked to be a medieval thief. Every risk felt too big for the reward. Every chilly breeze felt like it carried a warning. Every creak or cough could mean the end. So when you drift off tonight, and the world outside feels safe and sleepy, remember that in the Middle Ages, a thief had to wait for exactly this moment, the perfect, gentle hush of the town, when most were deep in dreams. That was the only time a tired soul could move without drawing attention. And even then, most went home empty-handed, hoping the next day might bring an easier opportunity, or at least a warm meal. And that, dear listener, is how a sleepy street at midnight could feel both very still and very tense all at once. A dance between shadow and light that never promised an easy prize. As the night deepens and the town settles into deeper sleep, let's take a slow, quiet stroll into the world of guilds. Those secretive groups of thieves that you might imagine like a cozy club. But in truth, they were anything but cozy. You see, most thieves longed for some kind of belonging. Working alone in the dark was exhausting and lonely, and having someone to share the risks felt like a distant dream. But entering a thieves' guild was never simple. The guilds kept their ranks tight as a miser's purse, and they weren't in the habit of simply welcoming tired, hungry strangers. If you weren't born into the right circles or vouched for by someone they already trusted, they'd close their doors before you even had a chance to knock. They worried about spies, informers, or fools who'd make too much noise at the wrong time. Trust was their most valuable coin, and they never spent it easily. Imagine then one of those would-be thieves standing at the edge of a dim candlelit room, hands trembling, hoping they'd make a good impression. An initiation might involve some strange ritual, swearing secret oaths they could hardly understand, reciting passwords under their breath, or demonstrating their light-fingered skill by lifting a coin from a guild elder who already had his sharp eye on them. And if they failed, that was the end. They'd be sent back into the dark. Alone again, wondering if they'd ever find safety in numbers. Even if they passed, they had to pay their dues, often giving up a chunk of whatever they managed to steal to support the guild leaders. Life inside the guild wasn't so much easier after all. And those guild halls weren't grand or warm. They were often tucked into crumbling cellars or hidden in disused barns, away from prying eyes. The members spoke in whispers, moved carefully, and kept one eye on the door at all times, just in case someone decided tonight was the night for a raid. Of course, rival guilds added even more tension. There were feuds as old as the cobblestone streets, little grudges that never quite healed. Every stolen purse could put you at odds with someone you didn't even know. And in those days, losing face could mean losing everything: your freedom, your fingers, or even your life. And so, even for those thieves lucky enough to gain admission to these mysterious guilds, nights were still full of watchfulness and worry. Every meeting held in a hush, every plan whispered in secret, always feeling that sleepy world around them might shift at any second. But for tonight, as you listen, let yourself feel that gentle thrill of being let in on a secret, a sleepy kind of camaraderie, shared only in moonlight and murmurs. It was a dangerous comfort, yes, but for some, it was better than facing the cold, empty alleys entirely on their own. And as we leave the guild halls behind for now, let your breath grow soft and slow. Imagine them extinguishing their last candles as they slip into their scattered sweeping places, promising to dream of easier days. The sleepy medieval town we're wandering through tonight was not a place where thieves could simply disappear into the crowd. It was too small, too watchful. Everyone knew everyone, and strangers were noticed like lanterns lit in a darkened room. And so, for most thieves, the only way to move safely was to blend in, to hide in plain sight, as though they were just another sleepy soul going about their business. They had to look like someone who belonged. You might imagine them pulling on the most ordinary clothes they could find, hoping they smelled of honest work, hay from the barns, flour dust from the mills, or the damp, earthy scent of the fields. Some would practice the way shopkeepers greeted customers, or mimic the tired shuffle of a farmhand too weary to ask questions. If they were truly clever, they'd pick a role so dull that no one would remember them. Maybe they'd slip into the marketplace as a quiet apprentice, balancing a basket of eggs. Or they'd wait until dawn broke and walk alongside villagers heading to the chapel, just one more sleepy face in a crowd. Every gesture had to be practiced. Every glance had to seem innocent. And still, fear was always close by. A sharp-eyed blacksmith or an overly curious tavern keeper could look up from their work and wonder, "Who's that one over there? Don't recall seeing them before." That was all it took for suspicion to grow like a stubborn vine. More than one thief spent the whole of a sleepy day pretending to admire a display of onions or watching laundry dry in the breeze, anything to pass unnoticed. Some even feigned sleep themselves on wooden benches outside, hoping that to everyone else they looked like nothing more than a tired traveler. And if someone called out, a simple excuse was often enough to soothe things over. "Sorry, sir, just resting my feet," or "long day ahead at the mill." Spoken in a soft voice, These small lies could mean the difference between safety and a sudden chase through muddy alleys. And so, for the clever thief, the trick was not boldness or skill with a lockpick. It was patience. It was knowing how to stand still and yawn at just the right moment. To lean against a sleepy wall and wait for an opening. And as we wander slowly onward tonight, listen to the quiet sound of distant church bells and let yourself imagine the long, careful hours spent becoming invisible to everyone who passed. That, too, was part of what it meant to be a medieval thief. A sleepy sort of skill, born of necessity and kept alive by endless caution. And for tonight, as the streets empty and the lanterns burn low, we can leave our careful traveler leaning against a doorway, waiting for their next sleepy, cautious step into the dark. When a thief's luck finally ran out in the sleepy towns of the Middle Ages, it wasn't a quiet, gentle affair. Being caught meant stepping into a world where justice was loud, public, and a bit too eager to make an example of you. Imagine the scene. A small crowd begins to gather in the village square, yawning and rubbing the sleep from their eyes as they come to see what all the fuss is about. Maybe the thief had been nabbed in the early morning, hands still trembling, coins jingling too loudly in his pocket as he tried to sneak away. There was never much mercy. Medieval punishments were designed to sting, not just for the thief, but as a warning to every sleepy soul who might have been tempted to follow their path. Stocks and pillories were popular choices, wooden frames that locked a person's hands and head in place so they could do nothing but stand, aching and embarrassed, as passers-by stared and whispered. Some crowds tossed rotten vegetables or a few sharp words. Children might giggle, and someone might make a joke about the thief looking like a scarecrow left too long in the rain. And yet the most serious punishments were even harsher. A repeat thief could lose fingers or an ear, a sleepy reminder etched into their skin forever. Every glance in the looking glass would remind them of their mistakes, long after they were free. There was a kind of sleepy cruelty to these punishments. The town didn't erupt into chaos. People went on with their day as the thief endured their sentence. Farmers went to the mill, bakers returned to kneading bread, and life rolled along slowly, while the punished soul stood aching and wishing the hours would pass faster. And then, when the sun began to sink and shadows lengthened across the cobblestones, the crowd would wander off, and the sleepy town would return to its hush. The thief might be left to sleep uneasily on a bed of straw, wondering how they would ever recover their strength or their pride. And for tonight, as we gently close our eyes and breathe in the quiet of our own safe world, let that thought slip softly into your dreams, that in medieval times, justice was a noisy spectacle by day and an aching lesson by night. But also know that, eventually, even these punishments faded into sleepy stories told by the fire, until one day they were all but forgotten. On many sleepy nights in the Middle Ages, when honest folk tucked themselves warmly into bed, there were those who lay wide-eyed and restless, their empty bellies growling louder than the crickets outside. For most thieves, hunger was not some small discomfort. It was a constant companion that shaped every sleepy thought and every careful step. You see, most thieves weren't bold rogues hoping to live like nobles. They were tired, desperate people who'd spent too long scraping by. Maybe they were farmhands after a terrible harvest, or servants who had been turned out into the cold. Every failed crop and unpaid wage pushed them a little closer to the shadows of their sleepy villages. And so they crept through doorways and alleys, hoping to find just one crust of bread left unattended, or a warm woolen cloak left to dry on a line. Even a small sack of oats or a single coin felt like a treasure if it could hold back the hunger for another day. But their aching stomachs made their hands clumsy. A stomach that growled too loud could give them away. The faint clatter of a stolen loaf could wake a family sleeping just behind a wooden door. Even the sound of their own breathing could seem too loud in the dark, as though the sleepy town itself was listening. And every stolen bite was tinged with fear and regret. Even as they hurried into the shelter of an empty stable to taste what they'd taken, they knew that one mistake could mean they'd go without food for far longer, locked away in a damp cell where the nights felt colder and lonelier still. And so, for most thieves, life was not an adventure. It was a quiet, desperate dance with hunger. A sleepy, cautious reaching out into the dark, hoping to catch just enough to survive. And as they lay down at the end of such long days, aching and tired, they wondered if tomorrow might be a gentler one where they wouldn't have to steal just to stay alive. And for tonight, as you listen to these sleepy stories and feel the softness of your own bed, let yourself appreciate the simple warmth of knowing there will be food on your table when you rise with the morning light. As dawn's first pale light begins to creep through the shuttered windows, our weary thief clutches a single copper coin in his palm. Yet even that tiny prize feels almost worthless. In the medieval world, honest markets were regulated by strict rules, and thieves had no proper way to sell their spoils. Most townsfolk wouldn't touch blood money, and respectable merchants wouldn't risk their livelihoods by dealing with stolen wares. So our poor thief had to find someone on the edges of society, an underground fence who might whisper in a hushed voice, "I'll give you half a coin for that one," while glancing over their shoulder. Imagine trudging through muddy streets before sunrise, boots heavy with dew, to meet by a silent archway where a shadowy figure counts out a few coppers and tosses them into your palm. Even if you'd stolen a fine silk scarf or a small silver goblet, you'd walk away with just a fraction of its true value, barely enough to buy a bowl of porridge. And worse, these secret markets were rife with danger. A wrong word, a slip of the tongue, might draw the attention of the town watch or a rival fence who'd demand a larger cut, or worse, steal your meager earnings right from under your nose. Every whispered negotiation carried the threat of betrayal. So most thieves learned that the real cost of their stealthy work was not just the risk of getting caught, but the quiet shame of knowing that all their careful planning and midnight daring might end with barely enough to fill their empty bellies. As you listen now, let the soft rhythm of your breathing remind you of how precious abundance truly is. While our medieval friend traded fancy fabrics for crumbs, you rest safely with all you need just within reach. As the night wraps the town in its softest shadows, let's pause by a flickering hearth in a humble cottage, where storytellers whisper of those rare few thieves who slipped through every trap and lived to tell the tale. These aren't grand epics of knights and dragons, but quiet legends passed from one sleepy ear to the next. There was Gemma Lightfoot of Ashford, they say, a slender figure who could lift a coin purse without so much as disturbing a prayer mat in the chapel next door. One moonlit eve, she supposedly slipped into the Lord's tower, lifted his signet ring, and vanished so completely that nobody believed the theft had even happened, until she mailed the ring back, tied with a ribbon and a note. "Sweet dreams, my lord." Then came Old Rowan, whose legend grew with every retelling. He was said to have survived the stocks, a bitter frost, and even a jealous rival who tried to end his tale for good. Against all odds, Rowan turned his capture into a cunning performance, feigning madness until the jailer's guard let down their watch, then escaping in the pre-dawn hush with only a toe tag and a crooked smile to show for his troubles. And every cottage visitor knew the story of the twin cobblers from Greenwood Lane, two sisters who pretended to mend shoes by day and slipped into their own patched boots by night, walking straight through the king's market with pockets full of gold. Legend claims they once swapped the king's new dancing slippers with a near-perfect copy, only to leave a single rose behind as their calling card. These stories weren't verified by dusty tomes or official records. They lived in the crackle of hearth fires, in the hush of late-night gatherings, and in the soft sighs of listeners drifting toward sleep. Each retelling added a gentle flourish, an extra glimmer of mischief, or a softer, more magical glow. And perhaps that's why these legends endured. They offered a kind of cozy magic, reminding listeners that even in those rough, cobbled days, someone found a way to outwit fate itself. They weren't bold heroes by sword or shield, but clever souls who danced along the edge of danger and came away with a story to share. So let your mind wander to those whispered tales. Picture a lonely hearth, the scent of smoldering wood in the air, and the faces of wide-eyed children leaning forward as each new detail unfolds. In their gentle wonder, the cold stones of medieval streets feel a little kinder, and the dark alleys a touch less daunting. And as your own eyelids grow heavy, know that every legend has a heartbeat, soft, steady, and warm, carrying you toward dreams as sweet and surprising as any midnight escape. As the moon drifts higher in the sky and the last lanterns flicker into darkness, our weary thief finds a hidden nook, perhaps a narrow alcove behind stacked barrels or a quiet corner beneath a sleeping wagon. Here at last, he lays down his tired body on a bed of rough hay, tucking his cloak around him like a patchwork quilt against the chill. The world outside is hushed. Even the distant bark of a dog seems muffled by the soft cloak of night. Above him, stars shimmer through gaps between rooftops, and the faint sigh of a breeze rustles the leaves of a solitary elm that stands sentinel over the empty street. In this stillness, every breath feels like a gift. Tonight he will doze without a heavy purse in his hand, only the memories of sharp cobblestones, creaky floorboards, and the distant clank of shackles. In his dreams, perhaps he walks through sunlit fields instead of narrow alleys, feels a warm loaf of bread in his hands rather than a cold, damp coin, and though he knows tomorrow will bring more cold cobblestones and wary watchers, for these few peaceful hours the world is just soft shadows and quiet comforts. The ache in his muscles slowly eases, replaced by the gentle weight of sleep pulling him under. As you lie in your own warm bed, imagine that same gentle embrace, how every whispered sigh of the night seems to say, "Rest now. You are safe." Let the rhythm of your breath match the slow, steady pulse of the silent town until your mind drifts beyond lantern light and into a world woven of dreams. For in those dreams, even a medieval thief finds respite, a momentary escape where hunger fades, dangers vanish, and the night holds only peace. And as you follow him into sleep's soft embrace, carry with you the comforting thought that no matter how dark the streets may seem, there is always a hidden corner where you can lay down your worries and rest. Good night, dear listener. May your journey through history's shadows lead you gently into the sweetest of dreams. Moon.